Long before cities were born, before kings claimed thrones, before alphabets shaped thought, there was something deeper, older, more primal. There was love. Not the romanticized kind whispered in poems or projected onto silver screens, but a fierce, instinctual longing need to connect, to not be alone in the dark, to matter, even if only to one other soul. This story is not written in ink or etched in marble. It lives in the forgotten pulses of ancient hearts, in the silent struggles of beings who never left behind words but left behind traces. It is a story carved into bone and buried in time. It is not myth, it is memory. This is the story of a Neanderthal who searched for love. And at Prehistoric Shadows, we bring stories like this back to life, cinematic, emotional, and human. If you believe that even the oldest hearts had something to say, subscribe now, because the past isn't silent, we just haven't listened closely enough. He was born in a cave near the edge of a forest, where the trees whispered to each other like ancient gods' gnarled trunks leaning close, leaves rustling secrets too old for language. The earth there was cold, damp, and eternal, cradling the tribe like a reluctant mother. It was no paradise, it was survival, and survival began with birth. The tribe marked his arrival not with celebration, but with silence. One more mouth meant more hunting, more danger. His mother gritted her teeth through labor, leaning against stone while the old women hummed low and steady like the wind through bone chimes. He didn't have a name. None of them did. Names were not yet invented, only gestures, glances, grunts each, meaningful in ways words could never replicate. But if he had a name, it might have been Stoneheart, not because he was unfeeling, but because he endured, because he held. He grew quickly, as all Neanderthals had to. Life didn't wait for children to become ready. It demanded they be ready or be gone. At age 10, he was already mimicking the older hunters. By 12, he brought down a wild Borolonis-only tool, a sharpened wooden spear hardened in fire. By 15, his body had become its own weapon. His arms were thick cords of muscle, honed by the weight of survival. His back bore the silent tally marks of scraped bark, stone pressure, and endless climbing. His brow was heavy, his skull thick, but his mind it saw. It remembered. It listened. He learned to recognize the trembling in a rabbit's breath, the shift in a snowdrift that meant a predator was near, the tone in a clanmate's breath that meant hunger or despair. Wisdom was not taught, it was absorbed, passed down not through lectures, but through instinct sharpened by generations of fire and frost. And yet, despite this strength, despite this place he carved for himself in the tribe, something in him longed. It began as a hollow ache, one that crept in after the hunts, when the fires grew low and others paired off beside their flickering warmth. He watched them offer gifts-knotted feathers, bone-carved beads, bits of flint polished smooth by nervous fingers. He saw the glances, the touch of hands, the choosing. But he had never been chosen, not once. In a tribe where being chosen meant food when meat was scarce, a hand when injury struck, or warmth on bitter nights that absence carved a deeper hunger than any famine. Then, one winter, everything changed. A neighboring tribe arrived, seeking trade. Their men carried bundles of dried meat. Their women bore flint shards and fur-lined pouches. Among them was a girl older than he, yet unlike any he had ever seen. Her hair was dark and tangled with ochre and feathers. Her eyes were black as cave shadows, and when she moved, it was as though the snow itself parted gently for her. She did not smile, no one did in those days, but her gaze as sharp as obsidian met his. Not with fear, not with scorn, but with something that lingered. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, he felt seen. She became an ache in his thoughts, a fire under his ribs. He began watching her the way he once watched the movement of prey, quiet, reverent, patient. He noticed how she tucked hair behind her ear when concentrating, how she dipped her fingers into crushed berry pigment before sleep, tracing symbols into her own palm. A ritual? A memory? He didn't know. But it mattered, because she mattered. He thought to himself, she looked, not away, not like the others. Her eyes stayed, like flame that does not fear the wind. He knew he had to offer something, not just a token but a truth. And so he dug. Beneath a stone near the back of the cave, he unearthed what he had buried years before, the tooth of a cave lion. The beast had nearly killed him. His thigh still bore its mark. But he had prevailed, and this relic was all that remained of that day. He polished it with ash, threaded it with sinew, whispered nothing over it because there were no words for what he wanted to say. And in the hush of night, he placed it beside her sleeping mat. He awoke with the sun. The pendant was gone. So was she. A storm had rolled in just before dawn. The trading party had left before the snow thickened, their tracks already dissolving into white silence. He said nothing, not to his mother, not to the fire, but for days he did not eat, he did not sleep. Something inside him pulsed, wild, erratic, foreign. He whispered to himself, "Gone, but I didn't give her my fire." And Sohei did what no Neanderthal had done before. He followed. Not for food, not for shelter, not for war. For her. 10 days he traveled, across frozen plains, through sleet that clawed at his skin, over ice-choked rivers, past the bones of mammoths and the howls of wolves. He fell once, gashed his shoulder on black rock. He nearly froze, curled beside a dead tree with a single ember in his palms. But the ember held, and so did he. He walked with dreams now, not just of her eyes, but of her voice, though he had never heard it. He imagined it soft, roughened by wind, shaped by firelight. He recalled her hand show. They moved through pigment, through fur, through silence, hands that seemed to sculpt meaning out of nothing. He remembered her glance, how it had pierced him without a sound, how it stayed with him even as snow tried to erase the world. On the 11th day, the wind changed. Smoke, a faint line against the horizon. He found their camp beside a frozen stream, half sheltered by mammoth bones and hides. He waited. Night came. Shadows stretched across the snow like reaching hands. Then she saw him. She didn't speak. She didn't run. He stepped forward, his fingers uncurled. In his hand, a second Giftan axe head carved from translucent stone, a piece of his soul shaped by time and fire. He laid it on the snow between them. She bent, picked it up, held it, and nodded. He followed her into the camp. No words, just breath, just firelight. Some watched, some whispered, but none stopped them. That night, they sat beside each other, silent. The space between them closed like the gap between flame and fuel. It was not a ceremony, it was not a rite. It was a choosing, and it changed everything. For 10 days he tracked them, through sleet that cut like knives, over rivers where the ice cracked beneath his feet, past mammoth trails and the towering ribs of creatures long dead, half buried in snow like forgotten gods. He faced wolves, their yellow eyes watching from the dark. He warded off one with fire, another with stone. He bled. He stumbled. But he did not stop. He was cold, hungrier than he'd ever been, his stomach twisted with emptiness. Yet the fire inside him burned hotter than any frost. Not just warmth, but purpose. What drives an ancient human across a frozen world? What prehistoric mysteries explain this madness? Was this just instinct? Or was it something more? This is the emotional side of ancient humans we rarely see, the Neanderthal love story we never imagined. He arrived at their camp near dusk on the 10th day, a valley of smoke and hide tents clustered near a frozen stream. His feet were bleeding, each step a quiet scream. His back was raw from wind and thorn. But in his hand, he still clutched the second Giftan axe head of translucent stone, a sacred thing he'd made years ago and saved for the day he'd become a man, a symbol of strength, of choosing. He did not barge in. He waited, at the edge, silent, breathing, until she saw him. She froze, her eyes wide, her breath visible in the evening air. Slowly, she stepped forward, uncertain, cautious but not afraid. He said nothing. He simply extended the axe. She reached out and took it. A murmur passed through the tribe. Her father muttered, "He crossed the ice? For a look from my daughter? He could have died." But the elder's voice came, brittle and cracked, full of ancient knowing. "Or lived a life without fire. Better to die with flame. Let them speak their own bond." No ceremony was held, no rituals performed. But that night, by the fire, they sat together. No words, just glances, shared silence. Her clan did not object. In a world ruled by hunger and cold, strength and sacrifice spoke louder than permission. What was exchanged that night wasn't language, it was legacy. The first sparks of human evolution storytelling. A silent vow that even in the darkest times, we still reach for light. In the days that followed, she spoke very little, but her presence beside him was constant. When he moved, she moved. When he hunted, she waited. And when he bled, she wrapped his wounds with quiet hands. She returned with him in spring. The walk home was slower, not from fatigue but because they were no longer alone. Their silences were shared. Their footsteps matched. When they arrived, his tribe watched, curious, guarded, but no one stopped them. They say she stood beside him when a bear charged their cave mouth, and he faced it barehanded to protect a crying child. They say she taught his people to weave feathers and hair into warning symbols, hanging them near cave entrances to mark danger, death, and sacred places. They say she sang once when his mother died. A low, haunting hum as she crushed ochre into dust and marked the walls with swirling signs. She grew vegetables from seeds carried in a pouch tied to her belt. She tamed a wild goat. She whispered to children. She smiled at wind. Every act was a thread in the tapestry they built together. Seasons passed. Winters came and left like restless spirits, but they remained together. She mended spears. He carried water. They hunted. They buried. They built. They built not just fires and walls, but rhythm, ritual, a language of gazes and shared breath, a home without words. She brought color to the cave. Not just ochre and ash, but the color of staying, of choosing. He would stare into the fire at night and think, "She gave me a name no one spoke aloud. She made me a man not with rights, but with presence." They never spoke of love. They lived it. Years unfurled like furs drying on stone. The cave filled with stories etched in bone and gesture. She taught a girl to braid nets. He taught a boy to track silence. One winter, many years later, she grew ill. The cough started with the frost. Her hands trembled. Her hums ceased. He gathered moss, boiled herbs, wrapped her in every fur he could find. She smiled once, weak, barely there. And then she was gone. No scream, no thunder, just absence. The tribe did not speak. They sat in silence. Even the fire cracked more softly. The next morning, he carved. He took stone, hard, unyielding, and with trembling hands, he chipped and shaved and shaped. Days passed. Snow fell. His fingers bled. He remembered the way she once stood against the wind, the way she leaned into him, not away, the way her breath sounded like trust. When it was done, he placed the carving beside the entrance of their cave. Not for worship, for remembrance. A woman, small, strong, eyes that did not look away. He sat beside it for days, not waiting, just being. And there it remained, weathered, cracked, but enduring. Like her, like him, like love. Time passed. His hair grayed, his hands stiffened, his eyes clouded. But every morning he touched the stone, and every night he slept beside it. One day, he too was gone. No one knew the moment, but the carving stayed. Centuries turned to millennia. Ice came. Ice melted. The world changed. Names were invented. Languages shaped minds. Kingdoms rose. Empires fell. And the carving remained, buried, until one day a hand uncovered it. Not a Neanderthal's, not even a hunter's, but a scientist's, a thinker from a world built on metal and machines. They brushed off the dirt, measured it, cataloged it, photographed it under artificial light. But some part of them deep down felt it. Felt him, felt her, felt love. Because some stories do not need translation. Some stories never die. And when the scientists closed their eyes that night, they dreamed not of data or diagrams, but of a cave warmed by fire, of a woman leaning forward, of a man holding an axe he never used in war. And they woke up wondering, who have we forgotten, and what parts of them still live in us? Today, scientists dig up fragments Neanderthal DNA in our blood, stone tools beside flower-strewn graves, symbols etched into bone. They study bones, tools, pollen traces. They scan skulls and reconstruct faces from fossils. But what they are truly trying to do is hear echoes, whispers, heartbeats from a time before history. And they ask, were Neanderthals like us? They once said no, that Neanderthals were brutish, dull, incapable of emotion. But now, each discovery peels away that myth. We find pigment-stained shells, suggesting they painted. We find carefully buried corpses, suggesting they mourned. We find fibers twisted into rope, flint tools sharpened with care, and graves adorned with flowers. And in our genes way, find them still walking beside us. The answer hides not in skull shape or brow ridges, but in stories like this. Stories passed in silence, inherited not through language, but through memory, through longing, through choice. Stories of how Neanderthals lived and loved, of the quiet bonds built without words, of sacrifice made not out of instinct but intention. Stories that reveal the emotional prehistoric drama buried under thousands of years of silence. Stories that show us that the first love stories weren't written with pen and ink but with blood, ash, and firelight. In the flint of a gift held out with trembling hands, in the shared silence around a fire, in a carved figure placed beside the mouth of a cave. This is what it means to be human, not just to think or speak, but to feel, to remember, to reach. And when we ask, were they like us? Perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Perhaps we should ask, what part of them still lives in us? Because deep inside, in our fears of loneliness, in our longing for connection, in our ache for meaning, we are not so different. Even in a world of ice and stone, love burns warm. Even in a time of survival, someone chose to give a gift not for trade, but for hope. So, when you hear the word Neanderthal, don't just picture caves and clubs. Picture firelight dancing on stone. Picture eyes that didn't look away. Picture the first steps of love across an endless winter. At Prehistoric Shadows, we bring you cinematic stories from before history blending science, speculation, and soul. Because storytelling is humanity's oldest tool, older than metal, older than war. And if these stories move you, if you believe there's more to the past than just bones and dirt, then subscribe. Because every ancient heartbeat deserves to be heard. And somewhere, deep in your DNA, perhaps it already has been.